This session is about using AsyncTask for executing background tasks in Android. So first of all, why would you want to do that? Why is it useful? Obviously, if you don't want to block the user's UI while you're doing something in the background, like for example, loading results from a web page or whatever. So you execute that in the background, and of course the user can just continue working until the task is ready. I'll do a demo in small steps here. I'll do the bare minimum first, so a very simple async task that executes something in the background, and there will be no user interaction at all. In the next step, we'll add a progress dialog so the user sees that something is happening in the background that he needs to wait for. In the third step, we'll show a progress indicator so the user knows how long the task will probably take and how much progress it already had. And in the last step, we'll enable the user to cancel the long-running operation in case he doesn't want to wait. Then back to a few slides about summary and finding more information on all of this. First of all, you'll have to set up a very simple project. So start Android Studio and go through this process very quickly. Start a new Android project, give it a name. We only want this to work on a phone anyway, so that's fine. We choose a basic activity, so we already have a button that can then later trigger the async task. And we'll leave this as is and press finish, and then we'll start with adding our first async task. After creating your project, you end up with something like this. First of all, we create our very first async task class here. And I'll paste the first piece of code here. All right. So if you extend the original async task, it takes 3 type parameters, which I'll get to a little later. Then the only method that you really need to override is doInBackground, which is the only method of this class that will run in a background thread. In this simple doInBackground function, I just iterate through my long-running operation, which you can see down here. The only thing it does is sleep for a second. And that's it. Then the parameter to doInBackground here is a string. This coincides with the first parameter to AsyncTask. So this is the type that doInBackground takes. It actually gets an array of strings. For example, you could use a URL, and then you could pass in multiple URLs that doInBackground then processes. The return value of doInBackground is the third parameter to AsyncTask. You can return any result, for example, the number of websites you downloaded or whatever. In my case, I just want to indicate success or failure. So now we just need to wire this up in the main activity and make the button that is already there execute our async task. This is where the floating action button action is added. We don't create, we remove the snack bar and instead add our own async task here. We instantiate a new async task and call execute. And here are the parameters that will be passed to doInBackground. As you remember, this is an array of strings. So now we create one just for this example to run. Now, if you run this example in your emulator, it only has this one button. It doesn't really do much. When the user clicks that button, it does something in the background. There's no feedback at all. And we'll work on that in the next step. So let's go back to my AsynCTask. We need to add a couple of things in order to show a progress dialog. Of course, we need a progress dialog itself and remember it as a variable in our class. And we need the context of the application in order to interact with the UI later on. So I added a constructor here that takes the context of the activity that we're running this from, so just to save it for later access. And then we need to add two more methods to our class. I think their names are pretty self-explanatory. One is called onPreExecute, which is executed just before the do in background task is executed, and the other one is onPostExecute. So in onPreExecute, we initialize the progress dialog, with the context that we already have from the constructor. We set a message and a title, and we show it. So the user knows there's something going on in the background. And when the task is finished, we just dismiss our progress dialog. Of course, now we also need to instantiate the class in a slightly different way. We have to pass the activity as, sorry. We have to pass the main activity in there, so the constructor can retain the context. So let's run the task again in our emulator. This time there is at least some feedback. The user doesn't know how long it will take, just sits there and waits until the task is finished. So there's nothing much to do, but it's better than just blocking UI without any feedback. Once the task is finished, the progress dialog goes away and the user knows it's done. Show some more feedback about the progress. We can show a progress bar to show the user how much time is left. And we just need to add one more method here on ProgressUpdate, which takes an array of integers. Integer, if you remember, is the second parameter we passed into AsyncTask. And integer is probably a natural choice to report progress, but you can pick something else if you want to. Again, there is an array passed in here, which corresponds to the array of tasks passed into do in background, so you can report progress on each of the tasks that you work on. As I, in my example, only have one, we just set the progress bar's progress indicator to the first element of this array. Now we also need to set up the progress bar in a slightly different way. This is done in onPreExecute. We need to set the maximum value, which is the number of iterations we're going through. We set the progress style to horizontal bar because the circle that you saw earlier is by definition indeterminate. And then we can set indeterminate to false, and then it's a real progress bar and not just a progress indicator. Finally, we need to report the progress from do in background. So before we even enter the loop, we publish a progress of 0. And within the loop, we can publish where we currently are. Now, if you run this in your emulator, you will see this nice indication of the progress. And when it's finished, it will just close itself. So let's add the finishing touch to this and allow the user to cancel out of the operation if he feels like it. Here we need to change the progress dialog a little bit. First of all, we set it to cancelable. And then we add an cancel listener to the progress dialog, which only calls cancel on our AsyncTask and does nothing else. The parameter to cancel here means whether to interrupt the long-running operation or not. So if you want to be nice and not interrupt, then you enter false here. If you want to be brutal, then you enter true, and then whatever operation is running in the background will be interrupted. You can also add yet another method on cancelled, where you can do whatever is necessary. So for example, if you cancel in a nice way and not in a brutal way, this uncancelled call could then stop whatever task is still running in the background in a more nice way than just killing it off. When we run this final version in our emulator, there's not much visible change here, but you can press the back button to cancel out of the long-running operation. Remember that you cannot add a cancel button to the dialog itself. It will just be the back button, which did not work previously. So to wrap up, do in background is the only method that runs in a background thread here. That means from all the other methods you have access to the UI, but obviously not from do in background. If you have multiple async tasks in your application, be aware that do in background always runs in the same thread. So if you run multiple in parallel, they will slow each other down or in the worst case block each other. And remember to capture the context in the constructor so you have access to the UI in other methods. If you want to get some more information and get deeper into threading, then look at runnables, at threads, at handlers and loopers. If you want to look into those classes a little bit closer, a good starting point is understanding Android core, looper, handler and handler thread. I hope this short video was helpful and showed you how to employ AsyncTask for simple background tasks in your application. Thank you.